you. I call Catherine Delahunty.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker. Tēnā koutou te whare. I'd just like, as my first speech of the year, I'd just like to mihi te Ngāti Parau hapu whānau iwi and acknowledge their loss of their rangatira api mahuika, moi mai I rangatira. Mr Speaker, ostensibly this is about tidying up the governance of universities and making the Teachers' Council into a more effective body. Although how this is achieved by changing the names, confusing the functions, cutting the representation and annoying enormous numbers of teachers and education professionals is anybody's guess. In 6 years of being on the Select Committee, I have never seen so much unity and solidarity from all parts of the tertiary education sector against this bill, and so little even attempt to explain why it is needed by the government. Quaint idea, a bill should have a reason. If they're going to gut the governance structures of universities, they should at least have the intestinal fortitude to explain why this is necessary. Virtually no academic or student who came before us wrote to say, "Thank you, government, what a fantastic idea." Au contraire. When the main supporters of a bill who appeared at the Select Committee are the glory-veiled fundamentalist Christian school from a closed community who discourage university education on the grounds that it might give people ideas, my guess is this is time for government to stop and ask themselves why this was drafted. Now, my guess is that Stephen Joyce thought he had a great idea, as he often does, and thought this is going to make university governance more business-like, so let's cut the numbers. And that was all the evidence he needed in order to do this to university councils. And my colleague Gareth Hughes will speak more about that later. However, the 1,525 submitters told the government they were wrong. So what does the bill say now? Did the government hear those submissions? There was one modification to the bill around the teachers' right to have a maximum, not a minimum, set on their own council. And that's the only change we managed to achieve after all of those submissions. So I would say the score is ideology 1, listening skills 0 by the government. The changes to the Teachers' Council itself are fraught with contradiction. On the one hand, they say they're tightening things up to make sure that teachers are properly registered, which is a good idea. We all support that. We all think proper registration of teachers is critical. On the other hand, they're expanding the way in which the limited authority to teach can be applied, which will facilitate more unregistered teachers. So we're so worried about the risk to children, except when we're not. Having it both ways doesn't actually work, Mr Speaker, and maybe I have digressed into the absurd idea that the government should have some consistency in education policy. I listened very carefully to the Minister's third reading speech. She talked about things like constantly raising, I'm quoting, the quality and leadership and setting standards and raising the status of the profession. I am fascinated by what this means, this rhetoric, because it was not clear in the bill and we could not get answers to our questions about it. The Minister said there were 3 years of consultation to create this confusing piece of legislation. And I don't know who was talked to in the 3 years, but I do know that 1,525 submitters, 90% of them were extremely unhappy when they came before the Select Committee. Perhaps the consultation was the example of my father's very special definition of the word consultation being a cross between a con and an insult. Either way, it didn't build a constituency in the education sector who was prepared to come to the Select Committee and show any support whatsoever on whether they were tertiary or the compulsory sector. The other aspects of the Teachers' Council changes includes confusing their function with a new broad undefined role, changing the Code of Ethics to the Code of Conduct, and that's been a very controversial issue. It is either designed to insult the profession or to tempt more control. And let us hope it is not about controlling teachers in terms of their voice. We have had enough Eleanor Catton and intellectual bashing in this country lately, and it's really important that we show some respect for teachers and their right to their intellectualism. This is a low trust model, and it is very, very concerning when the Code of Ethics is replaced by the Code of Conduct. Now, the government and the Minister actually referred in her speech to the Code of Conduct being different from the Code of Ethics because there would be consequences if you didn't meet the conduct standards. She says this was part of the bill was inspired by a famous sex offender case in schools. And I think she's referring to a case where the person basically lied their way into the classroom and was not caught, even though they faked their name and also hid their history. Now, I'm not sure that any code of conduct or code of ethics would stop someone who's prepared to go that far, to fake their name, to have so little ethics, that it's, and I'm not sure that a piece of paper called a code of conduct is going to intimidate them into responsible behaviour. It certainly isn't even going to catch them. The consequences for this kind of offending against children is not a slap on the wrist with a code of conduct. It's getting arrested. And so it should be. So what are we trying to control by getting rid of the ethics concept and turning it into a code of conduct? Returning to the Educans function, they took out the word teacher. And although the Minister has been at great pains to say we want to raise the teaching profession status, the word teacher is no longer in the title. Now, I'm all for the Aotearoa bit. It's time, we're over time that we acknowledge that we are an Aotearoa. But actually, what's wrong with the word teacher? Let's see who pays for this body. This body is paid for out of the fees of teachers. So if they want to use a pay system, then the government should at least listen to the users who are going to pay. How quaint is that? The Minister said today that the board's role was to set consistently high standards and continuous improvement. To what? Why? What's ERO's role for? What are they going to do that ERO and the other agencies that were described by other speakers are going to do? The Minister said something about undertaking contracts. What kind of contracts? For whom? Is Educans paid for out of the teachers' fees going to be contracting out for what purpose? We never got answers on any of this. Now, we had a weird fight in the Select Committee about how many members of the Teachers' Council, the new Educans, would be from the education profession, because originally the draft said there would be a maximum number of teachers with practising certificates. And the government said this was a mistake in the original drafting. But cynically, some of us thought they did it on purpose to draw the heat and then look as if they were listening by amending the draft. Fancy me being that cynical. It's hard to believe, isn't it? Would any government do that with a piece of legislation? But actually, either that or they're incredibly bad at drafting laws. Which is it? No one really believes them. The issue of appointment and not election. Again, if the piper is paying for the organisation, if the teachers are the pipers, shouldn't they be the electors rather than the minister? If the minister believes that the status of the profession should be raised, she should trust the profession and build their status by allowing them to have responsibility for their own professional body. It is actually that simple. The moderation clause is also frustrating. 10% of the registrations will be audited annually through a paper-based appraisal, and I think this was well covered by the previous speaker from the Labour Party, because he was a teacher and he knew exactly why it wasn't going to work. Excellent work. Calvin Davis made a really clear case. Actually, listen to teachers. He was like the many that came. So that one isn't going to work either. So my message not to the government, because I'm given up trying to give them messages, but my message to the educational professionals here, trying to do their best for students in this country, on every level, whether it's tertiary or compulsory, is simple, and it's in Latin. Now, I didn't do Latin at school, but I think this fits. Nils carborundum. Now, I don't really know what Nils carborundum is, so I had to look it up. And I always thought Nils carborundum was a 1970s Norwegian punk folk singer with like stringy, long blonde hair. But it turns out it's not. Nils is not that character. It turns out that what it means is, and I'm quoting, is don't let the bastards grind you down. So I urge the teachers and the university staff and the governors, don't be ground down. Keep standing the ground for education and its vital role as critic and conscience of society. Be the professionals who put children first. We need to raise the status of teaching. We need to protect our kids from people who are abusing the system, or at the very least being boring, because that's one of the worst faults of teachers. However, this is about leadership in the schools. This is not about changing the law in a way that insults the profession at every level. So Nils carborundum people, we actually have to keep standing up for what's important. And they can grind away with their ideology, but most people who enter education are motivated by a higher mission and a higher purpose. And that higher mission is actually about children getting the best they can from the system. And it's not a business, folks. Stephen Joyce is living on planet Stephen, but it's not a business. It's about education, and it's about a bill that fails to make it better. Kia ora tātou, we oppose the bill.
I call Tracy